Not all. We now doing technical session 2 on granting aid to the states government. The team that goes to the heart of Union State fiscal relations in the 16th Finance Commission recommendations. I now invite Dr. G.R. Reddy, eminent public finance expert and former advisor finance to the government of Telangana and key voice on Center State Fiscal Relations and Finance Commissions to chair this session. I also request our distinguished panelists. I now invite Sri A. Jha, IAS retired former Indian Finance Secretary and member of the Constitutive Finance Commissions to join the panel. I now invite Sri K. Ramakrishna Rao, IAS Chief Secretary, Government of Telangana and a key architect of the State Public Financial Management Reforms to join the panel. I now invite Dr. Gayatri Karnam, distinguished public economist with wide policy and advisory experience on state finances to join the panel. I now invite Dr. Manish Gupta, Associate Professor at NITFP and Specialist in Fiscal Federalism and State Finances to join the panel. Thank you, sir, and thank you to all the panelists for joining us. I now request the chair, Dr. G.R. Reddy, to conduct the proceedings.
So, 16th Finance Commission adopted 23 years practice of ordering 15 finance commissions, and they are not recommending the reductions. So, this has come out prominently. The problem with this is that, okay, there is a purpose in for the states to remain affiliate and leave lags in raising resources. Well, this is the normal refrain being against which goes against the continuation of universal price, post-inflation of the universal price. But Finance Commission has taken this stand. The exit of all the states put together is only 0.5% of the GST. They won't make it easily discussed. But my opinion is that the fiscal deficits on the states cannot be aggregated because we cannot adjust the deficit of one state against the other state. And surprisingly, I think under this system, apart from the merits of this recommendation, I'm looking at the practical problems. The practical problems being almost all the northeastern states, with the exception of Mizoram, are going to get less tax regulation in absolute terms compared with 2025-26. So they are facing a double value. They are cutting tax regulation and they are not getting any remunerative tax. So how are they going to manage? The Commission's condition is that there is enough space, fiscal space being expanded, but we may be able to expand it overnight. So that's the biggest question mark. So the other thing, the other major recommendation made by the Finance Commission is to grants to local funds. So why the Finance Commission recommended 85% grants to rural local bodies? They recommended something like 195% higher grants as compared to the last commission. Now, because this is based on the fact that we have taken into account the expert committee positions and total population. So they expected that they estimated that by 2026, the urban population would be about 40%. Based on this, so they distributed the local body grants into the rural local bodies and the urban local bodies in the ratio of 60-40. Now, the problem is that urban areas are able to mobilize 50% of their society. I mean, their resources are enough to give 50% of their expenditure. But in the case of the rural local bodies, they are able to mobilize only 14% of their own revenues. So, how are they going to make this gap in their This was the position. Because they get only 40%, 60% share. Previously, they were making something like 66% share. The total local body grants. And the other major problem is that there are all too many conditions. I don't want to get into details, I think it's for me. I just to analyze these things. I just want to set the stage for the discussions. If you look at the numbers, they said, okay, the eligibility for 20% of 80% of the basic grant and 20% is the performance grant. If you want to get 20% of this basic grant for other local bodies and local bodies, you need to, the state has to release 20% of the basic grant from their own resources in year 2 to be eligible to get this incentive, the incentive grants in year 3. And if you look at the state figures, I find it surprising that 20% of basic grant is much higher, than the incentive grant. I mean, the conditional grant of 20%. So where is the incentive? Where is the capacity of the states to fund from their own resources 20% of the basic grant by the foreign states? It may be little easier for the upper local bodies, but it will be difficult for the lower local bodies. So these are the issues that I pose before the panelists. With this, I will conclude. I think it's an unpleasant task for any chairperson to restrain the speaker to start office through. So I don't want to get into this embarrassing situation. So I request each one of the panelists that for us 10 minutes and spare me the embarrassment of asking them to start. And then I want to make a similar request for questions also. The questions be straightforward, simple, and then directed without much introduction because all the panelists are not experts in the areas and we don't explain too much. Straight away come to the question, what is that you want to ask the panelists? So thank you very much. I now request the ANGR to present his views.
A very good afternoon to all of you. Let me begin by thanking Dr. Reddy for having invited me and also thank Dr. G.R. Reddy who's chairing this panel, who also put in a word for me to not to refuse to come here. And for it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. I served in the 16th FC for about a year and a month or two. But a lot of the deliberations and conclusions which had gone into the report, I was not part of. So I can safely say that I'm not associated with any of these findings or recommendations of the Commission. Grants in aid, along with vertical and horizontal devolution, and grants in aid for local bodies constitute the three core functions of the Finance Commission under the Constitution, Article 280, and well known to everybody. We have discussed vertical and horizontal, and today we discuss grants in aid. 283B, I think, is the Constitutional provision. This report of the 16th FC departs from the past in that they have not provided for revenue deficit grants or gap grants as they are. And Dr. G.R. Reddy has set out the grounds on which they have denied this grant. What I propose to do in the next 7 minutes or so is to ask whether this is breaking a new ground and creating the right incentives for the states to behave properly and bringing more to the table of the financial arrangements that exist between the sectors and the authority. Or is it a departure from the constitution and the principles laid down? Focus of what I am going to say today is more on the constitutional design and the mandate which has been given to the finance commission, and see whether they have actually lived up to that mandate or not. To read Article 275(1), I'll just take a minute to read both Article 275(1) and 283(b), which prescribes the mandate of the Commission. 275(1) says, such sums as the Parliament may by law provide shall be charged to the Consolidated Fund of India in each year as grants in aid of the revenues of such states. Parliament may determine to be, I emphasize here, in need of assistance, and different sums may be fixed for different states. So each state has to be analyzed and assessed, is what this says. Article 275(2) says that till Parliament makes any such law, the President shall act on the recommendations made by the Finance. 283(b), which is the primary mandate of the Finance Commission, it shall lay down the principles which shall govern the grants in aid of revenues of the states out of the consolidated fund. You will have to read both the articles. So let's see. I mean, is the FC's recommendation, you tested on both these articles of the Constitution, does it stand? Let's just for a minute say that the Constitution does not prescribe grants in aid. Nowhere is it written that grants in aid is a word which they have used. But it is understood as a matter of convention, a constitutional convention. And what does that say? What does the Supreme Court say? Consistent decisions of the Supreme Court is that whatever be the nature of the Constitution, a great deal may be left unsaid in legal rules allowing enormous discretion to constitutional functionaries. Conventions regulate the exercise of such discretion. We are of the view that there is no distinction between constitutional law and an established constitutional convention, and both are binding in their field of operation. Grant in aid is a practice, gap grant also. Right? Grants in aid is a gap or a revenue deficit grant, has been in practice from pre-independence. If you read the Constitutional Constituent Assembly debates, entire discussion on Article 275 focused on the premise that there was wide distinction in the capacities of the state existing at that time. And if you see the report of the first finance, and you see the report of the last finance, the states which were doing well at that time continue to do well even now. States which were laggards at that time continue to be laggards even now. So this was emphasized repeatedly by the states, and they did not want that this discretion should remain with the government of India. In the 1935 Act, this discretion remained with the government of India, the Crown. But here, this was left to the wisdom of the Finance Commission till such time as the Parliament by law. The people as such made the law. Every 5 years, we have not made a law. So the FC recommendation remains the binding principle here. So having said that, does the FC have a discretion to refuse? People say that the constitution uses the word may. Parliament may by law prescribe or shall be charged, etc., etc. The word may has been used in this. This gives a discretion whether you do it or you don't do it. But again, let me quote from the Supreme Court. The use of the word may does not necessarily mean may not. The word may will transform to the word shall in the various circumstances mentioned in some ruling which they have cited. And further, it is the need of the state which is the sine qua non of such grant. And the word may and shall not be arbitrary and has to be read according to the facts and situation of the need of each state. Then we come to the words need of assistance. What does the need of assistance mean? This means the Finance Commission will carry out an analytical exercise in respect of each state, assess their expenditure needs as well as the sources of revenue. Has it been done? Maybe it has, but we have not privy to that information in respect of each of the states that has been analyzed or assessed by. There's a collective number which has come, and Dr. Reddy referred to it, as 0.3% is the deficit overall of the state. Factually, then, let us go back and see what is the situation. If you see the situation in the country since 2011-12, the data which they have analyzed, almost all states were revenue surplus. Post 2007-8, I think they have been consistently revenue surplus for several years. There have been breaks in the past because of certain disruptions in the economy, whether it was real impact, demonetization, slowdown of the economy in 2019-20, COVID, etc. The states which have continuously been in deficit are the northeastern states, the hill states of Himachal Pradesh, the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir, and three general categories states: Kerala, West Bengal, and Punjab. Each of them has a structural problem in their economy. That has not been addressed. The problem of Kerala is different from the problem of Telangana. You cannot not come down to it, even if you have surplus, you cannot lend to Kerala. So we have not done that type of an analysis which can give us a complete sense about the basics, fundamental structural problem that the Constitution mandated them to do. It is completely absent, and they have relied on phrases and words borrowed from the first Finance Commission without really realizing that first Finance Commission also said that if the state is assessed to be in need of assistance, they have to be required. Self-help is important. The Finance Commission's assessment is meant to do that self-assessment. I'll end here by saying that I see a lot of problems arising in the next 5 years, especially for states which are at the margin of which are structurally deficit, and nothing can be done about them. And we don't have any other mechanism to meet their needs other than what the Finance Commission has overlooked. Thank you very much.
I will request this is the most.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Revati, for inviting me for this session. So, as you are aware, as per FC 16 is concerned, there is a total change in the grants made for the application. Whether I would, after analyzing, after going through it, whether any any person, any reasonable person would agree with it or not. There can be differences of opinion, but I think some of the areas of which all of us could agree upon would be that the state-specific grants, as that's what in the morning, was acting like, was telling that it's acting like a god. Essentially, these are discretionary in nature. In fact, I remember my senior politician asking me, yellow put paisa dete hain. So if they say discretionary grant, then only the government talk to them. Otherwise, if it is coming in a formula, mara kya fayda. So these state-specific grants, I think certainly, being done away, I think it makes a lot of sense. Sector-specific grants, it is a kind of a wash, because there are certain national priorities which you would like to achieve by various means apart from tax devolution. So therefore, nudging the states towards certain sectors which are probably important from a nation's perspective, there is a case to be made. So certainly state-specific grants, there can be arguments which can be made from both the sides. You can always say that there are CSS schemes are there. There are other avenues through which you can push the states towards this, the national priorities. But I think here there is a case which is to be made for that. And then the most controversial topic is always the revenue deficit grants. All the states which are not in receipt of these grants, which are not likely to be recipients of these grants, would naturally say that they should not be there, which includes Telangana also. And many states which are dependent on this, for both structural reasons and other than structural reasons, would say that this must be continued. And I think that's what's reflected in the views of the states very, very clearly. To the extent that this mechanism has to evolve in the changing times, to the extent that we need to focus upon internally the state's own collection of its own resources, either it be in terms of planning of tax efficiency, improve the revenue administration of the states. I think it makes eminent economic sense to push the states for elimination of this revenue deficit grants, because then only they have an incentive. Otherwise, there is a perverse incentive. So they have an incentive to ensure that they get their housing help. And especially coming from Telangana, where our own state's own resources, amongst the entire states, our own resources are amongst the highest in the country. So therefore, it is possible, relatively, comparatively similarly placed states, it is possible to get your act together, to improve your revenues, to improve the tax administration, the efficiency, arrest the leakages, and ensure that the revenues are improved. Therefore, there is no need for a revenue deficit plan. But at the same time, like all the states are going through this, the revenue expenditures are completely ballooning up. Our state salaries can be extremely high. In fact, some of you might be surprised to know that in Telangana, a sweeper in a utility, in a power utility, after she puts in 20 years of service, she gets a salary of 2 lakhs. And the chief engineers in a state utility, they get much more salary than cabinet secretary or RBI governor. They get about 7 lakhs. That's the kind of unsustainable levels the state salaries have become. And this is not just state utilities, even amongst the regular government employees also. Because states have their own pay ratio commissions, many states have their own PRCs. And every 5 years they revise the pay scales. And in Telangana, I remember very, very clearly, in June 2014, when I paid the first month's salary to my state's employees, salary plus pension put together was 1,500 rupees. And last year, first month 2025-26, in April, when we paid the salaries, it was 6,000 rupees. So in a period of 6 years, sorry, in a period of 12 years, it has gone up by 4 times. And it's not because of the increase in the number of employees, it's because of the increase in the number of kind of scales. So 2 PRCs were implemented. This has totally become unsustainable. There's always an enormous pressure. This was organized groups. So therefore, there's always enormous pressure on the political establishment to increase these salaries. Therefore, I think this is a welcome move. Definitely, doing away with the revenue deficit grants, that would force the states to look up internally to ensure that they get their acts together. As far as the other grants which are concerned, I think there is an enormous increase in the grants which are from the local bodies. So I think which is consistent with the comments which the Finance Commission has been making, and the Commission visited Taj was also there as part of the Commission. So therefore, states which are fast organizing, they do require grants. In those of us where in Hyderabad recently, we have kind of amalgamated our 27 municipalities and more than 100 gram panchayats into Greater Hyderabad Municipal Corporation. So therefore, we need to provide services to these fast organizing areas. I think to that extent, this increase in focus on urban grants, I think it's a welcome measure from the states to certainly welcome it. And the rural areas also, there is an area of concern which Dr. Ziari certainly did refer to. That is because it is part of it is performance based, and the performance standards, sometimes you genuinely meet them, sometimes you may not be able to meet them for genuine reasons and other than genuine reasons. Therefore, there is a case which can be made that rural local bodies is certainly an area of concern. And finally, of course, disaster relief is broadly which is based on formulas, assessment of the disaster and things like that. So therefore, there's nothing really much that should be said about it. So my submission is that the welcome change is that doing away with these things, the revenue deficit grants, and then doing away with the state specific grants, sector specific grants. I think it is a real break from the past. Whether it is as per the provisions of the Constitution or not, whether assessment is to be made or not. That I think, as Dr. A. has said, that's always can be debated. But I think it certainly welcomes and it certainly nudges the states towards more responsible care. Thanks.
Sorry, I just forgot to mention an important point in my introductory remarks. So as far as revenue deficit grants and sector-specific and state-specific concepts, what is the action taken report? What does it say? The action taken report says that the government takes note of the above assessment of the Commission. All other recommendations, the government accepts the recommendation. So what does it mean? What are the implications of this? So does it mean that the sector is going to have dispensed some discretionary grants to states in lieu of post-revolution revenue deficit grants? So this is a matter to be debated. Thank you. Now I request Professor
As outset and from the SES from the Finance Department government for inviting for this very, very important policy discussion that's taking place here on the submission of the Finance Commission report as such. I think views on the grants made have already been very happily summed up by the three speakers, including our chairperson of the session. So I'm not really going to look into whether this entire discussion which has happened before the Commission submitted its report about whether it should be equity, efficiency, and how do we really balance these two. So there is a heavy discussion or debates which have happened across the country. And I think when you look at the overall report, definitely I think the Commission has acknowledged some of these demands from the performing states by sort of providing some kind of incentive to the states which are performing. I think this has been already discussed in the morning about the state's contribution to the GDP. And there are also other aspects which I look up in the report, but this is the grant agents which are not performing in 3 years or 4 years need to be reviewed by the country, and also about fiscal consolidation which is happening. So basically, I'm not really taking a stand either on the center or the states. I'm an independent public finance person who has been really looking at some of these aspects. So my broad kind of a distinction is based on the finances of the country. The grants made in the markets of the overall finances of the country. Whether the suggestions or recommendations made by the Commission are really in line with this. I think I fully agree with Ramakrishna Rao sir that sector-specific and state-specific grants, which have been actually completely dispensed with. There is a logic behind it, and every Finance Commission report, if you look at it, there's a big list of demands from the states. If you look at the states' reports, And it's really difficult to identify which particular demand this needs to be sort of provided support for. It starts with temple kind of a listing also. There are many demands which are being put up by the individual states. Coming to the core issue, that is the revenue deficit plan. Basically, I'm again putting this in the background of the overall finances of the country. And the point made by Govt about the performance of the states on the revenue deficit front. Post the formulation of FRBM by individual states, there has been states have been able to obtain revenue surplus. It sustained until almost 2015-16, and after that they started lapsing back into revenue deficits as such. I think in this particular context, it's really important for the Senate or any commission or the government to take a look at how exactly this has to be really bad. Okay. So I think the core question here would be, I think I look at Dr. Flores, so when he talks about how we define the revenue deficit. Okay. I mean, revenue deficit basically, sort of using the borrowed resources for your revenue expenditure as such, and it also about knowledge, economy, education, related expenditure need not be really considered and have to be taken into account. I think this particular aspect has been discussed time and again, and even the center has come up with varied or alternative terms to be used, like they're called effective revenue deficit, by taking into account the grants which are meant for capital plus as such. So I think, by talking about the overall situation and looking at the revenue deficit grants, and given the kind of expenditure, quality of expenditure which is being incurred at the state level, I was looking at the discussion on the subsidies. Out of some 21 states which used to have just 2% of their expenditure as subsidy, now it has gone beyond 20%. Okay. And again, as I said, I'm just going to flag the core concerns in the broader fiscal frontier of the country's developments as such. Are we really defining these subsidies in a proper manner? Do we have a common or uniformly kind of a defined, what do you get? Tracked subsidy figures by the states as such. We have even including, I was just having a discussion with our RBI friend. See, each state has its own kind of way of defining subsidy or sort of notifying which are the items which are subsidy items as such. So when we take this, the data which is given at the country level, indicating different states' subsidy figures as such, when we take that, these are uniform and we can make a comparison on these subsidy numbers. And cash transfers, again, the report argues that about 47% of the total listing is cash transfer which is happening. So given the kind of developments on the expenditure front at the state level, is it really wrong to sort of bring in some kind of a fiscal discipline at the state level? I think it's definitely, I'm not really looking at whether this is constitutionally correct or not. As I said, as an independent public finance person who's been looking at some of these issues, we definitely have many concerns about the growing revenue deficits at the state level. These are the declining capital expenditures. Okay, many of the states which used to have much higher capital spending has really significantly come down. Again, I go back to the issues of whether capital spending, you do really look at only, income generation and but these are aspects which should have been discussed by the commission. Yeah, how do we really define these fiscal deficits, revenue deficits, which can be taken into account, which can be actually accepted, instead of coming up with a ballpark number and saying that we should completely cut down on revenue deficits, which are the ones which can be acted? Can we really, could we have thought of some kind of an incentive which had happened earlier, that the states really sort of attained revenue surplus? But the fact of the matter remains that it's high time the states, and of course, center also has to take into account this, to the kind of announcements on the expenditure front. Can we really sustain our fiscal situation in the long run, medium to long term, if we have these kind of expenditures growing? And I just give you one figure about the central finances. Well, even at the center level, we had a very big share of revenue deficit in the total. About 70% of the fiscal deficit used to be in the form of revenue deficit. In the last 5 years, it has been brought down to 35%. But the question definitely remains, what are the aspects of expenditure which we do not have to really consider as, wasteful or, which can be dispensed with that. as such. So I think these are the core questions which need to be debated instead of just talking about, you just sort of drop the revenue deficit and then sort of put the states into problem. While as a principle, I completely am in agreement with the Commission's recommendation that revenue deficit grants need to be dispensed with, and there has to be some amount of fiscal discipline brought into the state's fiscal operations as such. I think those issues need a much countrywide debate, and then we need to arrive at some kind of a thing as to what is it that is acceptable and how do we really make sure that the subsidies that we are talking about are made comparable across states, and we are in a position to say that this is the kind of a situation of subsidies of the states. Right now, the numbers that we have are completely kind of misleading, because I can talk about like even the misclassification which happens at the state budgets as such. So any item which is actually a genuinely subsidy is not reported as subsidy, and an item which is reported as a subsidy in 1 year becomes non-subsidy. Okay, I think there are many of these operational issues which need to be carefully looked into. So on the second more important aspect is the grants to local bodies. We're very happy that there is a big increase which has happened, and it's almost double. And both the urban local bodies and also rural local bodies are going to get a bigger kind of a chunk of resources. But the core question, again, taking it back to the operational issues. I think while the Finance Commission had discussions across the country, they realized the fact that most of these grants are not being, states are not being able to use it because of the conditionality. Including the basic grant where we are talking about 50%, earmarked for maybe sanitation, water supply and all that. There were situations coming from Karnataka, we had examples where some local bodies had already provided 100% of these services. I mean, if they've already provided 100% of the services, where is the question of using that money? Okay, so reflecting the local needs is something which is completely missed out. I think that is an important aspect which should have been taken into account. But despite sort of, having some kind of widely discussed information about these, not addressing that adequately is a serious issue which needs to be taken into account. I think, otherwise, these are my points and I'll come back when there's more. Thank you, Senator.
Good afternoon, everybody. I would first like to thank Cess and Dr. G.R. Reddy for inviting me and giving this opportunity. My talk will focus more on local body grants and specifically on urban component of it. The 16th Finance Commission is probably the first Finance Commission post 73rd, 74th amendment. It had the availability of latest SFC reports of all states and also rich data on the finances of local bodies. And this is thanks to the entry-level conditions recommended by the 15th Finance Commission, which required all states to submit the SFC report and the action taken report by 31st March 23, and also local body publishing it and making it available online, document the audited financial statements and so on. So if you look at so this is the first commission which had, and they could have done a lot with that information being available. Because if you look at the previous commission, everybody had said that in the absence of SFC reports or data on local government finances, we were that restricted our work and we were unable to, we just were supposed to recommend ad hoc grants to local government. So if you look at the clauses, sub-clauses B, B and C of the Article 283, which was introduced after the 73rd, 74th Amendment, it says that the Finance Commission to make recommendation regarding measures needed to augment the consolidated fund of the state for supplementing resources of panchayats and municipalities on the basis of recommendation by the Finance Commission of the state. It's an altogether different thing that even now the state finance commissions lack this information. We do not have any estimate of
the difference between the revenues which the local government raise and the expenditures. We don't even have any discussion on the basic service level standards across acceptable service level standard across the country to even come up with estimates of how much funds would be required. So this is something which we need to focus on strengthening State Finance Commission or providing or getting some estimates of this gap between the revenues and the some basic services which the local governments are supposed to provide. So they recommended grants to local body, the 16th Finance Commission, and recognizing the fast urbanization and need for better services, they increased the share of urban component of grants to 45%, and rural component was 55%. And another thing which they did, which was very important and which ensured continuity, is they also included 3 entry-level conditions. One is publication of audited annual financial statement. The good work needs to be continued. Timely local body elections and regular constitution of State Finance Commission. And they also said that the action taken report should be submitted within 6 months. We looked at the action taken reports. On average, for 25 states, we found the states take 1 year to table the action taken report. So, basically, the recommendations of the SFCs get diluted. So this is something which the 16th Finance Commission continued did and added this extra caveat there. Now, the other aspect is now that given that the data on urban local bodies available for more than 3,500 urban local bodies out of 4,800, that data was available with the commission. And ULBs, if you look at as a group, is not homogeneous in nature. The corporations, especially the million plus, 34 or million plus corporations, they collect 60 to 65% of revenues from own sources. It is the smaller ULBs, the town panchayats and municipalities, which depend on grants, around 60% of their resources, 60, and for town panchayat it's even much higher. They depend on grants. Now, when they recommended distribution of the local body grants to ULBs on the basis of either the SFC recommendation, which is available SFC recommendations, or 90% based on population, and which in a sense means that most of the funds go to the urban local bodies, larger urban local body. And we had done some analysis using data from 3,200 ULBs. We find that the larger corporations or even the municipal corporation as a whole, they collect more revenues per capita from own sources. They also get more revenues on a per capita basis as transfers. And they are the ones which are more, they have better capacity, they have more avenues to raise resources. So not acknowledging the fact that it is the poorer or smaller local body, urban local bodies that need more resources, using 90% as the rate for population to distribute resources is unfair to this. Even if you look at the State Finance Commission reports, following the Central Finance Commissions, they also have opted to an easy way of distribution using 90% population, 10% area. So it is important that the smaller ULBs need more handholding, more support. Their capacity needs to be built. That something was totally ignored by the commission. So this is something I wanted to flag. The other issue is the 15th Finance Commission, 72.6% of it
their urban local body grants were tied. Even in this commission also, we find that the unconditional component is slightly higher than 32%. Given the fact that you have 50% of the basic grant which is tied, the 20% performance grant is based on urban local bodies making effort to raise their own resources and states contributing equally 20% of the basic grant recommended by the commission. So it's important to note that there is no publicly available information of how much money the state transfers to local bodies, except a few states. For most of the states, we have no idea how much money goes to the local bodies. The 13th Finance Commission recommended that along with the budget document, the state should come out with a supplement document highlighting funds transfers to local bodies. Initially, yes, many states started produce that, but now that has also gone for a toss. So, in the absence of this information, we don't know whether this 20% would be the only fund which the state would transfer to local bodies, because when you look at the State Finance Commission transfers, while the action taken report says that the recommendations have been accepted, we don't know whether it has been implemented in the absence of this information. So, except for states which have where local bodies or which are transfer resources to local bodies in a transparent manner, I think this again would mean limiting the flow of resources to local bodies. So these are some of the issues which I wanted to highlight. The other aspect, the final point is the 15th Finance Commission had recommended grant for air quality, 12,000 crores. It also had a formula 10% weightage on forest cover, and it was shared in very dense and moderately dense forests. Now, what this commission had done was, it seems that by including open forest, which accounts for 43% of the total forested area of the country, and from a climate change perspective, it seems that they have diluted that forest criteria and not giving grants, not acknowledging the fact that air quality is a problem, and we've had so much of discussion in the last few months. Does it give some kind of signal of diluting our fight towards better quality air or environment? I stop at that. Thank you.
I confusingly thank each one of the panelists for the excellent leaderships. Actually, Stephen has been, I mean, put the entire issue of vaccine in the proper perspective, in terms of the constitutional provisions, in terms of the assessment made by the Finance Commission. I mean, I don't think the Finance Commission has made the assessment except the aggregate level. And they said, one blank statement says that the states have enough fiscal capacity, but the fiscal capacity varies from state to state. I mean, all the states are not equally used in terms of fiscal capacity. Okay, and Dr. Stronger also is an important issue about the state specific states, the government specific guidelines, or the assessment that is required to debate the problems, the kind of problems that will arise in assessing the requirements of states on an objective basis, like the question, I mean, problems in defining what is a subsidy and what is not a subsidy. And Manish Gupta, I think, he elaborated on the grants recommended by the Commission to urban rural body. Thank you very much. Now the floor is open for questions. And I request you earlier, please keep your questions very short and tight. And the time is about 20 minutes.
So I had a question. If I'm permitted. My question is to Sri Ramakrishna Rao garu, where you have mentioned that revenue deficit grants, especially in the case of Telangana, it is because there is states' own taxes and it's performing well. Own taxes are highest among the states. Is it due to the sale of assets or is it due to the recurring taxes that is there? Because once it's sale of assets, it's one time kind of thing. Thanks.
Thank you. My question is addressed to Mr. Jha. You use the word structurally deficit states. Is it that seems to suggest there's something intrinsic to those states that makes them structurally deficit? What part of that is because the state's own lack of efforts? That is it.
Well, one of the things which worried me was we have national health report, for example, where the central issues are very clear and the central issues are very clear. But the Finance Commission, when the government is not taking interest on that, we expect that while going through the Sixteenth Finance Commission report, on particularly the horizon going through, on the grand index or sector number I, there must be something where the report talks of gender issues and the children's issues. Because we have national tax survey, it was very clearly mentioning about the issues being felt by the country or being borne by the country very critically. Is that those are the problems which I wanted to, the issues which have been raised by Manish. For example, let us take the example of NMA being suffered by both mothers and the children, or women and the children. There's no mention. The last sentence is that we also do not recommend any sector specific of state specific grants. No sector specific or state specific grants. That means we have completely forgotten gender dimension of the Finance Commission report. That's very unfortunate.
2 points to make. One is starting with the chairman. He talked about rural-urban component in terms of allocations, and he says that the urban bodies are getting better because whatever reason. And also the panelists also correctly said the urban incomes only with corporations is true, but not with municipalities or town panchayat. Town panchayat and municipalities we have done some studies in Telangana. Their incomes are very meager. That's why states have to pitch in to support municipalities and town panchayat, if not the corporation. That is. Number 2 is that you talked about rural-urban composition. I'm telling that urban areas is growing at 43%, so the finances are fine. Let us also talk about the poverty is more located in rural areas than in urban areas. So it's not very fair to say that rural areas, because the poverty is also quite high in rural areas. So obviously, rural bodies, they're the casualty for this kind of arrangement. And one more thing, I think the Prime Minister said that regarding Telangana, I must say that we are part of the State Finance Commission reports here, that CS is also here. Now, Telangana has submitted first State Finance Commission report in the year 2019-2020. But it took 3 long years for the ATR to become rectified in Telangana Assembly. But still, we are not sure whether these monies have come to the local governments. That's it. Well, let me finish that. The last point is that, the analyst said that all the commission reports of the State Finance Commission reports are before the 16th Finance Commission report, the 16th Finance Commission, before finalization. No, it is not. The second SFC report of Telangana has still not been submitted. But we are in the work, so we know that. Thank you. Couple of points. Point number 1 is, I'm just quoting the commission. the analysis of the state's performance using stochastic quantitative production function shows that by fully exploiting potential, 2 lakh crore could have been collected by them. Then they would go on. Then another context they argue that the pension payment in Kerala is as high as 7,000 as compared to 4,000 in Bihar. In Kerala, it is, I'm using Kerala because they said it. Kerala is 11,000 crore. Now the question is that I want to ask is that Constitution says in states in need of. Here our Sri Ramakrishna Rao said that states really profligate. I mean they go spending on getting salaries like that. Now they are supposed to undertake, for example, the homework in terms of detailed studies of the states they have not done. What they have done is convenience-based conclusions are already given. Had they undertook kind of a state development kind of report kind of thing, what Professor Alivalia proposed in the morning, they have arrived at the conclusion that, okay, if Kerala has got 7,000, it has contributed incredibly today to the national. If you have 11,000 salary, it has had its social benefits. That has not been done. Then finally, when they are saying that 2 lakh could have been collected by the states, the current budget of the national government, additional tax mobilization is only 40,000 crore. In Kerala, it is 4,000. Why are they looking only at the states? What about the tax collection potential of the union? What has been happening with corporation tax? The share has been coming down from 3% to 1.7% now. So what I'm trying to say is that the constitutional mandate given to them is actually, I would say that they have resolved beyond the constitution to justify what they want to do. This is not substantiated by empirical or informed analysis for making informed policy making. Why I fully agree with this is that there are states which are doing freebies and freebie everybody is there. There is no freebie. There are issues, but they should come up with you cannot go beyond this benchmark. This kind of a proper analysis. This policy making in a fiscal governance is not like making puppet. It needs hardcore analysis and hard work. That is not there. With that, you could be able to today come up with a much more sensible policies and benchmarks which can be given. Okay, if you cross that, we want you not expect good prosperity over it. Those kinds of things should be done rather than sort of easy way of okay, no grant. It's not the way. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Joseph. Before we take the second round of questions, I request the yes,
The first question, Professor Reddy, I mean, I remember broadly the figures, maybe a little bit disconnected, but in the first 10 years, the total expenditure in the state of Telangana has been about 15.5 lakh crores. That's the kind of total expenditure. And out of this, by the sale of assets, the monies which are mobilized are less than 15,000 crores. Less than 15,000 crores. So you can see it's a significant number, but it's not, it's not overwhelmingly large. That's all. The tax buoyancy has been very, very good. The average, the nominal growth rate of the economy has been about 11 to 11.5%, and the state's own tax and non-tax revenue growth rate has been better than that. So the buoyancy has been about 1.1 to 1.2%. So therefore, what has significantly contributed is the buoyancy more than the sale of assets. So that has been a thing. Of course, Professor Koshi's point, salaries and pensions, so let's say, never debated kind of a point, and especially in some of the states in the country where we have our own pay revision commissions. If you are broadly following the Central Pay Revision Commission, at least you are indexed to that. Some states follow it to the lag, but few states in the country, we are lucky or whatever unlucky to have our own pay revision commissions whose lifetime exactly coincides with the election time cycles. So therefore, so they have perfected this art, and that's and it has its own issues and pathologies, which many of us in the room are aware. But one simple statistic that I would like to, just leave as a matter of thought for the room. We recently recruited 563 officers for the group one exam, for the group one examination, public service function. Group one examination. That's vertical, because the highest level in the state civil services, 563 people per year. The examination took about 2 years. The whole process, case, court cases, matter went all the way to Supreme Court, and came back, etc., etc. But more importantly, for every one position, 790 people. These are the actual people who wrote the examination. 3.5 lakh people wrote the examination. 560 people got the examination. And you can see that between 20 to 30, till the age is over for the general candidates, everybody is only preparing for the group 1, group 2, group 3. They're always there in the market. So instead of skilling all these things that we are talking about, they're only preparing for the examinations. So the only industry which is doing a roaring business in Hyderabad, apart from IT and pharma, is the coaching industry. So so that's what is the and that really tells that the kind of distortion which has been produced in the labor market. Our salaries are unreasonably high at the lower levels. Of course, in my own interest, unreasonably low at the higher levels. But nevertheless, jokes apart, I think it completely distorts the kind of people that we prepare in the markets. And I think it has huge implications. So therefore, I think definitely all sensible people should look into this kind of thing. And subsidies are less said better because we created a phenomenal pipeline through digital public infrastructure where IAS Finance Secretary transferred in one day to 16 lakh farmers 7,000 rupees through revenue. And the number of review cases was less than 6,000. Phenomenal work, but then we only create more and more subsidies, but we are not able to roll back. This program was supposed to roll back other subsidies, but we only add on what is existing. So the political pressure is so much. So therefore, I think there is a need to
outlays cannot be taken. Outlays need not necessarily be taken as model. Is that what
Want to respond to the question with structurally deficit states. When I say structurally deficit states, they are typically the northeastern states and the hill states, where the dependence on central transfers is immense. For northeastern states, on an average, I would say there is not more than 20% of whatever they need. 80% goes by way of transfers. Same story with a state like Himachal Pradesh, which is slightly better endowed than the northeastern states and Gujarat. So this is a structural problem. Now, every state has to provide the same type of administrative services and comparable levels of public service, as we say, as any other state. Uttar Pradesh will provide the administrative structure, so does Manipur. They also have to provide, they have to have district, they have to have service. There is a cost to it. They can't meet those costs out of their orders. So what will they depend on central transfer? Central transfer consists of two parts. One is the devolution and the second part is the transit. Earlier you had a planned transfer which was a very substantial amount of money which is going. That is ended. So the revenue deficit grant meets their basic essential requirements. If you see the budgets, they are usually surplus because the central transfers are sometimes more, and that goes into capital expenditure. You see the capital expenditure of these states, it is far more than the national average. See, national average is around 3%, barely 3% they are reaching. They are about 5, 6, 8, Arunachal Pradesh will be 20. So it's not that the money is squandered away as it has been assumed that this RDC goes into this freebies. Freebies for states which are using surplus on their own. Telangana collects almost 80% of its own resources and its dependence is only 20% of central. It gets barely 2% or 2% of central. They collect huge amounts of. They're giving free, they give out of their own money. Tamil Nadu was a state which gives freebies for generations, I think. They have been giving. They managed to be well till the 15th FC brought down their devolution so dramatically that they went into a fiscal stress in that sense. There are states like Kerala, which Dr. Joseph talks about, or for example, Punjab, which are huge debt liabilities of the past. Because of borrowings and the large non-plan expenditure which is incurred by them, which after the large part of it got financed through plan, a lot of posts were financed through plan mechanisms. So they have a problem. West Bengal didn't have an FRBM for till about 2010. So there was fiscal discipline. So there is a problem. So these are problems which need to be analyzed and addressed. I'm not saying they should all be given revenue. They should not be given if they don't deserve. But you do an analysis and find out where is it that I have gone, where have they gone wrong. And something be done. Punjab is saddled with a debt of 3,000 crores because of some food related issue in 2017. The debt GSDP ratio ballooned after that. Yet they give freebies. Okay, they don't give salaries, they don't give other type of funds, etc. They don't contribute to the centrally sponsored scheme. That's fine. But that's the way the states have chosen to run. You punish them, but at least analyze and tell us where is it that they have gone wrong. We're not saying that. Broad brush analysis saying, oh, they are all responsible. This will create adverse incentives. It does create adverse incentives. If you give a large deficit, revenue deficit grants to a surplus states, you create adverse incentives. That's not meant to be. Sometimes devolution creates. See, Bihar, which is the poorest state in the country, has never got a revenue deficit. Maybe way back in the past, it would have got. Because the per capita expenditure is the lowest, 2,500 rupees per capita. So even if 14th FC increase Bihar's share by adding almost 80% of their SS needs onto their assessment, yet they did not get. Yet they did not. The base is so low, base is so low. Uttar Pradesh is slightly better, but they never got very different. They are not profitable. They run into revenue deficit not because they need it. Our capex is high. Our educational expenditure is amongst the highest in the country.
But excuse me, is that inability to spend in the case of Bihar and UP?
So in the past, yes, but now they are spending. They are spending. Yet, I mean, there is a capacity issue also.
The lack of capacity to spend.
That's also there. Lack of capacity is there. Human resources are not there. I mean, let's say you need teachers. Process of recruitment of teachers is so complex in today's world. You have public services and various types of commission. There will be hackles there in terms of leakage of question papers, so on and so forth. It keeps getting. I mean, there are multiple issues, but Bihar's basic expenditure in the last 10 to 12 years has risen, as has UP's. UP spending very high sums on capital expenditure. They are poor states. So they need assistance in some form. Where does that come from? Not from revenue deficit. Surely not. That's what. Structural problems in Manipur, Nagaland, Mizoram. And why am I worried? Because these are sensitive states. They are on the border, these are all sensitive states. You have a dimension larger than just managing the administration over there. It can have ramifications for that area.
That's not advice on all these states, but surely not a state like Kerala. If they have a problem, it's of their own making, and they should have to pay for it as well.
No, I'll just tell you, I will tell you a very interesting, see, I've been studying this thing for a while. You go back to the Constitution Assembly debates. There's an intervention by a representative from Kerala where he says that their level of expenditure in education is amongst the highest in the country, and when it comes into the union government's arrangement, they will suffer because their costs will not be reimbursed to them. What happens to them? So he poses this question to Dr. Ambedkar. So the answer is that the Finance Commission will come and answer it.
And basically, here also, the island are the ones who are not spending. And people go hungry, they are in poverty, and this is in poor and this is a state where extreme poverty has been eradicated in the country, and in fact, in the rest of the world. When I went to Africa, it was a great, people behind me, how did you do it? You know, but now, when in the country, we are kind of vindicated, saying that, okay, you are doing.
I wanted to get in a slightly perspective on the inclusive grants. I find the recognition in terms of revenue deficit being bad is linked to how the sector sees it. Revenue deficit of states is not a bad thing because you are providing services. What are you spending revenue deficit on? Your salary, which everybody is talking about 60%, 70%, whatever number. It's about doctors, it's about teachers, it's about policemen. Whereas in the case of union, it is about joint secretary sitting in the Ministry of Agriculture, doing precious little, providing no service at all. So let us understand that the revenue deficit need not be practiced saving. That is point of one. Second, more importantly, what I want you to take away is with this whole thing of the 16th Commission, turns out this is the most important facet of the polishing of revenue returns. Are we seeing a different trend, which is of centralization to decentralization? You are giving money with the panchayats, hand over fist, starting with Arun Jaitley's budget of 2016, where 1 lakh crore was passed on to the thing for the state. And in the process, you are bypassing the state. Now, what is happening is the panchayats and the ULPs are biting the heels of the state from below. The center is pushing them from top. You will eventually have a situation where you may not even need a state government. You can straight do it from the union to the panchayat. Now, curiously, when Montek says that he prefers smaller states, it's again the same situation. Because today you have bigger states like Andhra, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, who can stand up to the center politically. When you have these smaller states, they cannot stand up to the center. And it automatically and axiomatically leads to a much larger form of centralization. So smaller states may not help the cause of federalism. You will still need states which have the power. Ultimately, whatever the Finance Commission may do, the federal notion of India is a political story. You will find resources flowing much better when you have coalition governments. You talked about Bihar not getting these things, but Bihar and UP and Madhya Pradesh was getting 70% of CSS. What was that doing? The other point which is now coming back is you are worried about Northeast and J&K. Are these the same states that Planning Commission called them special category states and then made provisions for it, which has been abolished? So you are creating us in the process of this whole revolution. You have created a situation where you don't have institutional mechanisms to address this issue, which is why I'm saying you need to rework the entire federal compact. You cannot cut and paste it like this and have a solution. These now, see, in the Finance Commission, I remember, apart from everything else, equalization and theory and analytics, grants in aid was used as a balancing factor. Because the chips, how they fall, once you have division criteria, you can't predict. Right? 14th Commission messed up with Tamil Nadu. Ideally, some grants would have gone to compensate them for. That hasn't happened. So you have to see grants from a slightly more holistic perspective rather than just the revenue deficit grants. Very short of time. Yes, yes, that's right, that's right. How will try to close this issue? Also, 5 years approximately. Bring down the 6.